Here we see what is referred to as the camelid sacrum bone in the shape of a canine.
Yes, and we know it was excavated from what is now known as Tequixquiac, Mexico, so we know it's from the Mesoamerican tradition.
Precisely, but this is interesting because scholars date this artifact between 14,000 BCE and 7,000 BCE, long before the Mayan, Aztec, and Inca traditions became established.
So it is best, then, to consider this work in isolation of these periods and has a great chasm of time that spans between the later Mesoamerican traditions and this prehistoric work very much isolates this work.
But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't relate these qualities found in this work with qualities of other works representing other cultures.
Very true. We see the sacrum bone take a prominent stance in many cultures in their religious or spiritual beliefs.
Take, for example, the ancient Egyptians, who often imbued meaning in the bones of their ancestors. In the case of the very special sacrum bone, the Egyptians used the word jed to describe the bone found at the base of the spine. The word jed, in Egyptian, was also the name for the backbone of Osiris, believed to impart those who call upon it with determination and fortitude.
Yes, and the Egyptians also echoed the cultural beliefs of those who crafted the camelid sacrum bone in the shape of a canine, and that the end of the spine was thought of as a second head almost, a head that existed in the spiritual world. So in this way, the sacrum bone becomes a very real and powerful gateway from the physical world to the spiritual.
This portal-like functionality that the sacrum bone seems to be rooted in multiple cultures, and yet, to modern knowledge, these cultures were isolated from one another.
Returning specifically to the prehistoric Mesoamerican culture that crafted this work, meaning is truly found through the understanding that it was not just an everyday object, but rather a work reserved for the highly esteemed religious ceremonies.
Scholars surmise that this work was integral in ceremonies revolving around fertility, and not just that of individuals, but keeping in mind that these peoples, as hunters and gatherers, would be dependent on the natural bounties supplied by nature.
And this is perhaps the reason why a canine, a natural predator, was chosen as the image to represent fertility. In a way, the humans who crafted this object needed to take inspiration from the canine and learn to be successful hunters in order to survive. There is also evidence that this work was used as a mask, further strengthening the argument that humans sought to become more like the canine.
The sacrum bone selected by the prehistoric Mesoamerican culture was that of the camelid, which was held in high esteem among the hunter-gatherer population.
A great deal of care was taken to utilize every part of the animal's body, as it was the main source of nutrition among these people. Just as in more recent times, the Plains Indians of North America relied upon the wild buffalo to sustain the large Native American populations, so too was the camelid relied upon by this prehistoric Mesoamerican culture.
But I think it's also important to consider the other understanding of fertility. Many cultures believe the greater spinal column to be a transportation route for biological information passed along in the act of reproduction. Anatomically, it was a belief held by a myriad of cultures that the sacrum specifically transports seminal fluid from the body into the receiving member.
This is absolutely correct, and even Leonardo da Vinci, with his vast understanding of the human anatomy, incorrectly assigned the sacrum with reproductive purposes in males.
And just as it was believed that this bone fostered new life due to the longevity of the bone's existence underground, it breeds new understanding and insight into the afterlife beliefs of prehistoric Mesoamerican peoples.
Interestingly enough, the ancient Mesoamericans knew about the qualities of the sacrum bone, a particularly dense bone, and its inherent resistance to decay, and it is because of this quality that it was known as a sort of resurrection stone.
Yes, and one could even say the mask, being carved of the material, seems to transcend time and forms the mask's use as a vessel to contact previous generations gone by.
Imagine, perhaps the power of a religious leader putting on this mask and speaking with such authority.
What a strong visual that would have been, and one would be remiss if they didn't sympathize with these ancient beliefs, that the mask granted the wearer some sort of time-transcendent insight.
And it is important to recall the context of this religious object, and how even in this elemental society, there was still a level of complexity associated with the theories about spirituality.
That is very much a constant that is seen amongst the first works of art in the prehistoric genre, and I think it speaks to the fact that humans seek to understand forces seemingly out of their control.
And at the end of the day, it's objects like the camelid sacrum in the shape of a canine that reflect that.
It certainly does give us a unique view into an otherwise obscure time, doesn't it?
It certainly does. That's what makes this work so profound.